It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Fetch me a fresh glass of water, Emma, Victoria snapped, sliding her half-empty tumbler across the white linen cloth. You're used to serving people at that little desk of yours anyway. The condensation from the crystal glass seeped into the pristine tablecloth at Lusk, the city's most exclusive dining room. Emma Evans didn't move. She sat tucked into the corner of the velvet booth, her modest navy blouse a sharp contrast to the shimmering gold silk of her sister's designer dress. The scent of roasted rosemary and Victoria's cloying, $500 perfume filled the small gap between them, thick and suffocating. "Don't be difficult, Emma," Mr. Evans said, not looking up from his menu. He adjusted his silk tie, the heavy gold watch on his wrist catching the light of the crystal chandelier. "Your sister has had a grueling day at Sibling Corp. The least you can do is make yourself useful while we wait for the appetizers." "He's right, dear," Mrs. Evans added, patting Victoria's hand with an indulgent smile. "Victoria is carrying the weight of the family reputation on her shoulders as CFO. You, on the other hand, just answer phones. It wouldn't hurt you to show a little respect for her position." Emma felt the familiar, dull ache of betrayal, but she kept her expression as smooth as the marble floors beneath her sensible flats. She had spent 3 years playing the role of the disappointing daughter, the one who had settled for a secretarial position at a mid-sized firm, while Victoria ascended the ranks of Sibling Corp. With a trail of suspicious, record-breaking quarters behind her. The maître approached the table, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He began to bow toward Emma, his eyes widening with a flash of recognition. He knew exactly who was the primary shareholder of the fund that owned this building. He knew whose signature appeared on the checks that kept Lusk in business. Emma caught his gaze, a nearly imperceptible shake of her head freezing him in his tracks. Her eyes were cold, a silent command for him to remain silent. "Is there a problem?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with an arrogance that made the maître's jaw tighten. She didn't notice his hesitation. She was too busy checking her reflection in the back of a silver spoon. "And where is our wine? I specifically requested the 1996 vintage. I doubt my sister can even pronounce the name of the vineyard, but I'd like it poured now." "Of course, miss," the maître murmured, his voice strained as he pivoted toward Victoria. He glanced back at Emma one last time, a look of profound confusion crossing his face before he retreated. "See," Victoria smirked, leaning back and crossing her legs. The sharp asterisk clack asterisk of her designer heels against the table leg echoed in the quiet room. "That's how you handle people, Emma. You wouldn't understand. You're a follower, a servant by nature. It's why you're still fetching coffee for some middle manager while I'm preparing to oversee the biggest acquisition in Stirling's history." Emma reached into her purse, her fingers brushing the cool, sleek surface of her encrypted work phone. It vibrated once, twice, a rhythmic pulse that felt like a countdown. "The Atlantic Global acquisition?" Emma asked quietly. Victoria laughed, a sharp, grating sound that drew the attention of several nearby tables. "As if you'd know what that means. Yes, the acquisition. We're buying out a massive competitor. It's a move that will put Stirling and me at the top of the food chain. Not that it matters to you. You'll be lucky if your little firm doesn't get swallowed up in the process. I imagine the due diligence for a deal that size is quite extensive," Emma said, her voice calm. She pulled her phone out, the screen shielded from her family's view. "Target, Sibling Corp status, ready for hostile takeover, awaiting COO authorization." "It's perfect if that's what you're asking," Victoria sneered. She reached out and flicked a stray hair off Emma's shoulder with a look of pure disgust. "Unlike your life, my work is flawless. Now the water, or do I have to ask the waiter to show you where the tap is?" Emma looked at her sister. She saw the entitlement in the curve of her lips, the absolute certainty that she was untouchable. She looked at her parents, who were nodding along, already basking in the reflected glow of Victoria's imagined triumph. They had no idea that the mid-sized firm Emma supposedly worked for was actually a shell company for Atlantic Global. They had no idea that Emma wasn't the receptionist. She was the one holding the pen. Emma stood up slowly. The movement was deliberate, drawing the eyes of her parents. "Where are you going?" Mrs. Evans asked, her brow furrowing. "The wine is coming." "I need to take a call," Emma said. She didn't look back as she stepped away from the table, her heart thumping a steady, predatory rhythm against her ribs. She walked past the maidard, who stepped aside with a deep, respectful bow that Victoria was too distracted to see. Emma stepped into the quiet foyer of the restaurant, the heavy oak doors muffling the sounds of her family's laughter. She swiped the screen of her phone and hit the dial button. It was answered on the first ring. "Marcus," Emma said, her voice dropping an octave, losing every trace of the submissive daughter. "The Sibling Corp audit report you sent over this afternoon. The one detailing the $300 million in hidden liabilities Victoria has been masking." "Yes, Emma," Marcus replied, his voice crisp and professional. "It's all there. The fraud is systemic. They're a house of cards." Emma watched through the glass partition as Victoria toasted her parents with a glass of champagne she couldn't actually afford. "Execute the takeover," Emma said, her eyes fixed on her sister's smiling face. "And Marcus, make sure the first thing the new board does is call for a forensic audit of the CFO's personal accounts. I want it done by Monday morning." She hung up the phone and felt the weight of the sleeping lion finally begin to stir. The dinner wasn't over. In fact, for Victoria, the real meal hadn't even been served yet. That evening, the crystal chandeliers of Lusk seemed to pulse with a predatory light as Emma returned to the table. The damp, cold silk of her blouse, still stained crimson from the wine Victoria had accidentally spilled, clung to her skin like a second, less comfortable layer of patience. She sat down quietly, her expression a mask of practiced submissiveness that she'd worn for 3 years. Victoria Evans didn't even look up from her phone. She was busy admiring a digital mock-up of the Woman of the Year, cover she'd essentially bought for herself with Sibling Corp's marketing budget. "You were gone a long time, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with a casual, practiced cruelty. "I hope you weren't in the bathroom trying to scrub that stain out. It's silk. Once a peasant messes it up, it's trash, just like the dress." Mrs. Evans chuckled, patting Victoria's hand. "Don't be so hard on her, Vicky. Emma just doesn't understand the value of things. It's hard to keep up when you're living on a secretary's pittance." "Actually," Mr. Evans interjected, checking his gold Rolex with a sigh of boredom, "we should discuss the Sibling Corp gala on Friday. It's the official announcement of the merger with Atlantic Global. Victoria, I expect you to be the star. And Emma." "Well, perhaps it's best if you stay in the office that night. We wouldn't want any more accidents in front of the board." Emma felt the phone in her clutch vibrate, a single, short pulse. Marcus had executed the first phase. She took a slow sip of her water, the cold liquid a sharp contrast to the heat of the rage spike blooming in her chest. "Friday," she repeated softly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Dad." Victoria let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Did you hear that? She thinks she's invited. Emma, honey, the guest list is for executives and shareholders, not for the help." "But tell you what, if you're so desperate to see how the other half lives, you can help the catering staff. I'll make sure you get a nice little apron." The maidard approached then, holding the bill on a silver tray. He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward Emma with a flash of recognition he quickly suppressed. He knew exactly who she was, the woman who had personally approved the restaurant's lease last year. But a sharp, nearly imperceptible shake of Emma's head silenced him. "Give that to Emma," Victoria snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "She needs to learn how to handle large numbers. Consider it a training exercise for your little job." The bill was for $4,000. Victoria hadn't even looked at the prices of the vintage Bordeaux she'd ordered. Emma took the leather folder, her fingers grazing the smooth grain. She saw the $300 million in liabilities Sibling Corp was hiding, reflected in the sheer audacity of Victoria's smirk. The next morning, the transition from the cramped, one-bedroom apartment Emma maintained for her family's benefit to the glass-walled sanctuary of Atlantic Global was a ritual of reclaiming her power. The scent of white truffle and condescension from the night before was replaced by the crisp, sterile smell of high-end air filtration and expensive ink. As she stepped into the private elevator, the chime was a low, melodic signal of her true status. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, Marcus was already standing there, a tablet in his hand and a cold, professional smile on his face. "Good morning, Emma," he said, falling into step behind her as she strode toward the mahogany doors of the COO suite. "The acquisition of Sibling Corp's debt is complete. We now own 42% of their outstanding liabilities. By the time the gala starts on Friday evening, that number will be 51. Emma sank into her leather executive chair, the city of New York sprawling beneath her like a map she'd already conquered. She touched the corner of a physical file on her desk, the forensic audit. It was thick, filled with the evidence of Victoria's systematic embezzlement and the creative accounting that had kept Sibling Corp afloat. "And the personal accounts?" Emma asked, her voice no longer the soft, hesitant tone of the disappointing daughter. It was iron. "Victoria Evans has been using company funds to lease her penthouse and pay for her personal security," Marcus reported. "She's also funneled $6 million into an offshore account in the Caymans. I've already alerted the forensic team. We'll have the frozen asset injunction ready by Friday morning." Emma looked at the calendar on her desk. 3 days. "Make sure the invitation for the gala is sent to our parents' house," Emma said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "But address it to the Chief Operating Officer of Atlantic Global. I want them to spend the next 48 hours wondering who their new boss is." She leaned back, the silence of the office a stark contrast to the noise of Victoria's insults. The countdown had begun. Victoria wanted a show on Friday night, and Emma was going to make sure she got one. "Marcus," she added as he turned to leave, "order a new dress, something in midnight blue, and make sure it's the kind of silk that doesn't stain." 2 days later, the air-conditioned chill of the private law office felt like a whetstone, sharpening the edge of Emma's resolve. She sat across from Marcus, the heavy oak table between them scattered with the wreckage of Victoria's financial empire. The scent of old paper and bitter, over-roasted coffee anchored her to the moment. Emma reached out, her fingertips grazing the embossed seal on the forensic audit. The paper felt thick, expensive, and devastating. Marcus slid a final translucent folder toward her. "It's all here, Emma. The offshore accounts, the forged signatures on the Sibling Corp quarterly reports, and the direct trail of the $6 million. She didn't even use a shell company for the final transfer. She was so sure no one would ever look at the boring, logistics side of the merger." "Arrogance is a terminal condition," Emma murmured. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers that represented her sister's greed. Every digit was a nail in the coffin of Victoria's career. She felt a strange, cold calm. The sleeping lion hadn't just woken up. It had finished its hunt and was now simply waiting for the sun to rise on the day of the feast. "The frozen asset injunction is signed," Marcus continued, his voice low and professional. "The moment you take the stage at the gala, every credit card in Victoria's designer wallet will turn into a useless piece of plastic. The penthouse, the car, the offshore accounts, everything will be locked pending the criminal investigation." Emma nodded, the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner marking the seconds until her sister's world imploded. "And the invitation." "Delivered this morning," Marcus confirmed. "Your parents called my office 3 times trying to verify the COO title. They seemed confused." Before Emma could respond, her personal phone vibrated against the wood. The caller ID displayed a photo of her parents' home, a sprawling estate Emma had helped pay for through anonymous bonuses Victoria had claimed as her own. She answered, keeping her voice soft and unassuming. "Emma, are you there?" Mrs. Evans's voice was frantic with excitement, though she didn't bother asking how Emma was doing. "You won't believe it. Victoria has finally done it. An invitation arrived today for the Atlantic Global Gala. It's addressed to the Chief Operating Officer. Can you imagine? Our Victoria, the COO of a global titan." "That's wonderful, Mom," Emma said, her eyes fixed on the document proving Victoria had stolen from that very company. "It's more than wonderful, it's a miracle," Mr. Evans chimed in from the background, his voice booming with pride. always knew one of my daughters would make the Evans name legendary. It's just a shame you couldn't have put in half the effort Victoria has. You'll be watching the news for the coverage, I assume. We're going to buy her the most expensive bouquet in the city." The line went quiet for a second before a familiar, sharp voice cut through. Victoria had clearly taken the phone. "Hey, little mouse. Did you hear? I'm moving up in the world. Real power, Emma, not just filing papers in a cubicle." "I heard," Emma said, her voice like glass. "The COO position is a very big responsibility, Victoria. Are you sure you're ready for everything that comes with it?" Victoria let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Oh, please, I've been running circles around people like you my whole life. I'm going to be the star of that gala. The board is going to realize I'm the best thing that ever happened to Atlantic Global. By the way, don't bother coming by the house this weekend. Mom and Dad are coming to my penthouse for a private celebration. We wouldn't want you feeling out of place. You know how it is with high society events. You just don't have the look for it." Emma looked down at her hands. They were perfectly steady. "You're right, Victoria. I'm sure the night will be full of surprises. Just make sure you wear something memorable. You'll want to look your best for the cameras." "I always do," Victoria snapped before hanging up. Emma set the phone down. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the coming storm. She turned to the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant diamonds. She could almost smell the metallic tang of the impending rain. "She has no idea," Marcus said, standing up and closing his briefcase with a sharp, final click. "None," Emma agreed. She stood and walked to the corner of the room where a garment bag hung from a brass hook. She unzipped it slowly, the sound of the teeth parting like a sharp intake of breath. Inside, the midnight blue silk shimmered, catching the dim office light. It looked like deep water, beautiful, silent, and capable of drowning anything that fell into its depths. She ran her hand over the fabric. It was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the heat of the rage she had carried for years. Tomorrow, the mask would come off. Tomorrow, the secretary would vanish, and the COO would stand in the light. 24 hours, Emma whispered to the empty room. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, digital recorder. She pressed play, listening to the recording of Victoria's voice from 10 minutes ago, bragging about a title she didn't own and a life she had stolen. Emma's smile didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't just going to take everything back. She was going to make sure Victoria Evans watched as the entire world realized exactly who she was. The countdown had reached its final cycle. Emma gripped the silk of her dress, the texture a promise of the justice to come. The gala wasn't just a party, it was a courtroom, and she was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. She walked out of the office, her heels clicking a steady, lethal rhythm against the marble floor. The day before the Atlantic Global Gala, the Evans household hummed with the kind of frantic, self-important energy usually reserved for a royal coronation. Emma Evans stood in the kitchen, the scent of expensive jasmine perfume, Victoria's signature, drifting in from the hallway before her sister even appeared. It was a heavy, cloying smell that always felt like it was trying too hard to mask something sour beneath. Victoria swept into the room, her designer heels clicking against the white marble like a countdown. She didn't look at her sister. She looked through her, as if Emma were just another piece of the high-end furniture. "My gown for tomorrow needs to be steamed again, Emma. The silk is delicate. Try not to ruin it with your clumsy secretary hands." Emma didn't flinch. She felt the cold, hard weight of the flash drive tucked into the hidden pocket of her cardigan, a small, plastic rectangle that held the power to vaporize Victoria's career in a single afternoon. "You're very focused on the dress, Victoria. Maybe you should be more focused on the Sterling Corp audit reports. I hear Atlantic Global is quite thorough during acquisitions." Victoria paused, a mocking smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. She finally turned, crossing her arms over her chest. "Audit reports, please. I've handled the board for 3 years. I'm the CFO, Emma. I don't just handle audits, I dictate them. You wouldn't understand. Your world is filing papers and making coffee for people who actually matter. Atlantic Global is lucky to have me coming on board." "Things change," Emma said, her voice like a calm lake over a jagged reef. Sometimes the people who matter aren't the ones standing in the spotlight. Sometimes they're the ones holding the light. You should be careful. High towers have a way of crumbling when the foundation is rot. Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. Rot, I am the foundation. Tomorrow night I'll be standing on that stage, and you'll be in the back, probably checking coats or whatever it is you do. Don't try to sound deep, Emma. It doesn't suit a girl with a community college degree. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in favoritism. Mr. and Mrs. Evans sat at the head of the mahogany table, their eyes shining with pride as Victoria Evans regaled them with tales of her latest triumph, a merger that Emma knew was actually a desperate attempt to hide Sterling's hemorrhaging debt. To Victoria, Mr. Evans said, raising a crystal glass that caught the light in sharp, jagged shards. The brightest star in the family. Tomorrow night, the whole city will see what an Evans can achieve. Mrs. Evans nodded, her hand resting on Victoria's arm. It's such a shame your sister couldn't find a more prestigious path, but at least Emma can watch you from the sidelines tomorrow. It's good for her to see what real success looks like. Emma sipped her water, the cool liquid a sharp contrast to the heat rising in her chest. She looked at her sister, who was basking in the praise like a lizard on a warm rock. You're right, Mother. Tomorrow will be very educational for everyone. I've made sure of it. Victoria didn't even catch the edge in her sister's voice. She was too busy checking her reflection in the back of a silver spoon. Oh, Emma, your little plans are adorable. What did you do? Arrange for the caterers to give me an extra shrimp. Just stay out of the way and try to blend into the wallpaper. It's what you're best at. After dinner, Emma retreated to her room, the silence of the house feeling like the breath held before a scream. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text to Marcus. Is the final slide deck secured? The reply came seconds later. Locked and loaded. The Atlantic Global Board is expecting the CFO reveal at 9:00 p.m. They have no idea it's you. Victoria still thinks she's being introduced as the new partner. Emma looked out the window at the city skyline, where the Atlantic Global building stood like a monolith of glass and steel. For years, she had let them believe she was the failure, the quiet secretary who couldn't keep up with her brilliant sister. She had watched Victoria steal, lie, and mock her way to the top, enabled by parents who only saw the glitter and never the grime. She reached into her closet and pulled out the garment bag. Inside wasn't a secretary's sensible wool coat, but a gown of midnight blue silk that felt like water between her fingers. Tomorrow, the world would find out that the woman Victoria treated like a servant was actually the woman who signed her paychecks. Sleep well, Victoria, Emma whispered to the dark room. It's the last night you'll ever spend at the top. She sat on the edge of her bed, checking the digital recorder one last time. The countdown had moved from days to hours. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the only thing left was for the predator to step into the light. The gala wasn't just a celebration, it was a reckoning, and the clock was ticking toward 0. The evening of the Atlantic Global Gala arrived with a crisp, biting chill that seemed to sharpen the city skyline. Inside the grand ballroom of Lusk, the air was thick with the scent of Casablanca lilies and the expensive, metallic tang of top-shelf champagne. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen explosions from the gilded ceiling, casting a fractured light over the cream of the city's financial elite. Emma Evans stood near the perimeter of the room, her presence intentionally muted. She had traded the midnight blue silk gown for a sensible, high-necked black dress that screamed assistant to anyone who bothered to look. She wasn't ready to drop the mask, not while the predator was still preening. She felt the weight of the digital recorder in her small clutch, a secret anchor against the tide of opulence. Victoria Evans was impossible to miss. She was a streak of aggressive gold in the center of the room, draped in a sequined gown that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She held court near the ice sculpture, her laughter sharp enough to cut glass. Beside her, Mr. and Mrs. Evans stood like twin pillars of reflected glory, their faces beaming with the kind of pride they had never once directed toward their other daughter. It's about scale, Victoria was saying, her voice carrying easily over the soft hum of the string quartet. She gestured with a diamond-encrusted hand toward a group of investors. Sterling Corp isn't just growing, we're absorbing the competition. My latest acquisition strategy is going to make Atlantic Global look like a lemonade stand. Emma watched from the shadows. She saw the way her mother smoothed the fabric of Victoria's sleeve, a gesture of pure adoration. When Emma had called them last week to mention a small promotion, her mother had told her to be quiet because Victoria was on a business call. The memory tasted like copper. "Oh, look who decided to creep out of the filing room," Victoria sneered, her eyes locking onto Emma. She didn't lower her voice. If anything, she projected it, drawing the attention of the nearby guests and the maidard, who was hovering nearby with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Victoria marched over, her gold heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble, a sound of pure, unearned authority. "Emma, I specifically told you not to come if you couldn't find something that didn't look like it was bought at a funeral home. You're depressing the guests." "I'm just here to see the evening through, Victoria," Emma said. Her voice was level, a calm like hiding a jagged reef. "Well, see it through from the kitchen," Victoria snapped. She turned to the investors, rolling her eyes. "My sister. She has a heart of gold, but the ambition of a goldfish. She's been a secretary for so long she's started to blend into the furniture." Mr. Evans chuckled, patting Victoria's shoulder. "Now, Vicky, someone has to do the grunt work so people like you can lead." The maidard shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between the two sisters. He knew Emma, not as a secretary, but as the woman who had personally reviewed the gala's security protocols 3 weeks ago. He opened his mouth to speak, but Emma caught his eye and gave a microscopic shake of her head. "Not yet." Victoria leaned in closer to Emma, the smell of her heavy, floral perfume cloying and aggressive. "I'm announcing the Sterling expansion tonight. After that, I'll be the youngest woman in the city to hit a 10-figure valuation. What did you do today, Emma? Order more staples? Organize the paperclips by color?" "I made sure everything was in its proper place," Emma replied. She reached into her bag and felt the cool, smooth surface of her phone. A single text from Marcus sat on the screen. "The board is seated. The acquisition documents for Sterling Corp are live. They think they're buying us. They're about to find out we already bought them." "You're pathetic," Victoria whispered, her face contorting with a flash of genuine loathing. "You've always been the shadow. Just remember your place when I'm on that stage. Don't try to come up and congratulate me for the cameras. I don't want your cheap perfume rubbing off on my sequins." Victoria turned her back, dismissed Emma as if she were a stray hair on a lapel, and glided back toward the center of the room. She was the sun, and everyone else was merely a planet trapped in her orbit. Emma moved toward the back of the hall, near the heavy velvet curtains that flanked the stage. She found Marcus waiting there, his tuxedo impeccable, his expression a mask of professional neutrality. "Is the feed ready?" Emma asked softly. "The projector is slave to your device, Emma," Marcus whispered back. "The moment the CEO of Sterling Corp, your sister, steps up to announce her victory, the real financial statements will override her presentation. The fraud, the debt, the redirected funds, it's all cued." Emma looked out at the room. She saw her parents laughing at one of Victoria's jokes. She saw Victoria accepting a fresh glass of champagne, her head tilted back in a triumphant pose. The arrogance was a physical thing, a shimmering veil that prevented her from seeing the cliff she was standing on. "She thinks she's the predator," Emma said, more to herself than to Marcus. "And you, ma'am," Emma adjusted the cuff of her plain black dress. "I'm the one who built the cage." The lights in the ballroom began to dim, a signal for the evening's keynote address. A hush fell over the elite crowd as the spotlight found the podium. Victoria began to move toward the stairs, her gold dress catching the light, making her look like a goddess of industry. She looked back once, searching for Emma in the gloom, her lips curling into a final, mocking smirk. Victoria stepped onto the stage, the applause swelling around her like a physical wave. She adjusted the microphone, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of her greatest lie. Emma's finger hovered over the send button on her phone. The countdown had reached 0. "Good evening, everyone," Victoria began, her voice radiating fake humility. "Tonight, we talk about the future of Sterling Corp, and more importantly, we talk about who really owns this city." Emma pressed the button. The screen behind Victoria flickered, then turned a deep, ominous red. The reckoning had arrived. The deep, crimson glow from the massive screen washed over the ballroom, staining the white lilies on the tables the color of dried blood. Victoria stood frozen at the podium, her hand still hovering over the microphone. The triumphant smile she had worn seconds ago was now a jagged mask of confusion. A low murmur rippled through the elite crowd, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "There seems to be a technical glitch," Victoria said, her voice cracking through the speakers. She looked toward the wings of the stage, her eyes searching for the tech crew, but her gaze landed on Emma, who remained standing in the center aisle. "Emma, don't just stand there like a statue. Fix this. This is why I pay you, you useless girl." The audience shifted, their heads turning between the trembling woman on stage and the calm figure in the aisle. Emma didn't move. She didn't flinch at the insult. Instead, Marcus stepped out from the shadows of the stage left, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that cost more than Victoria's entire Sterling Corp wardrobe. He wasn't carrying a laptop or a tool kit. He was carrying a single, heavy leather folder. The maître, standing by the champagne tower, stopped mid-pour, the golden liquid overflowing a crystal flute and splashing onto the silk tablecloth. He recognized Marcus, not as a technician, but as the primary executor for Atlantic Global. Marcus walked to the podium and placed the folder directly over Victoria's prepared speech. "The screen isn't a glitch, Victoria," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. "It's a notification of acquisition. As of 4 minutes ago, Atlantic Global has completed a hostile takeover of Sterling Corp. All executive powers are suspended, effective immediately." Victoria's face didn't just pale, it underwent a violent, structural collapse. Her perfectly contoured cheekbones seemed to sag as the blood drained away, leaving her skin the color of wet parchment. Her eyes, once sharp with malice, stretched wide until the whites showed all the way around her pupils, flickering frantically like a trapped bird's wings. Her lower lip trembled, losing its haughty curve, and her mouth hung open in a jagged, silent O that made her look suddenly, pathetically old. The gold sequins on her dress, which had made her look like a goddess moments before, now seemed to mock her, glittering under the harsh red light as she began to shake. In the front row, Mr. and Mrs. Evans looked as though they had been struck by lightning. Mr. Evans dropped his scotch, the glass shattering against the parquet floor with a sharp, final crack. Mrs. Evans reached out to grab the table, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the screen behind her daughter. The screen flickered again. The red background vanished, replaced by a high-definition image of the termination papers. At the very bottom, in the space reserved for the Chief Operating Officer of Atlantic Global, was a signature that made the entire room go silent. Emma Evans. "This is a lie," Victoria hissed, though her voice lacked its usual venom. She clawed at the folder Marcus had brought, her manicured nails tearing the leather. "Emma is a secretary. She lives in a studio apartment. She's nothing." Emma began to walk toward the stage. The sound of her modest heels on the floor was the only noise in the room. She climbed the stairs slowly, her expression as unreadable as a frozen lake. When she reached the podium, she didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply leaned into the microphone. "You spent years telling everyone I didn't belong in your world, Victoria," Emma said, her voice cool and steady. "You mocked my clothes, my job, and my life. You used the company bank account as your personal vault, while I was busy buying up your debt." Victoria reached out to grab Emma's arm, but Marcus stepped between them, his presence an immovable wall. The board members in the second row were already standing, their phones out, their faces twisted in a mixture of greed and terror. They were realizing that the woman they had enabled was no longer the one holding the checkbook. "You're fired, Victoria," Emma said, stepping back from the podium. And because the acquisition includes a full forensic audit of the CFO's office, the security team waiting in the lobby isn't here to escort you to a taxi. They're here to ensure no documents leave the building. Emma turned to the audience, her gaze lingering for a brief second on her parents, who looked at her with a sudden, sickeningly sweet realization in their eyes. She didn't give them the satisfaction of a nod. "The gala is over," Emma announced. "The bill has been settled." She turned and walked off the stage, her silhouette sharp against the glowing screen. She didn't look back as the first sob broke from Victoria's throat, a raw, ugly sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. Emma walked through the double doors and into the cool night air, Marcus following a step behind. "What now?" Marcus asked as the valet pulled up in a black sedan. Emma looked at the city skyline, the lights of Stirling Corp flickering in the distance. "Now," she said, "we see who else thinks they're untouchable." As the car pulled away, a single notification chimed on Emma's phone. It was a message from the private investigator. The audit had already found the first offshore account. The fall was only beginning. The next morning, the glass facade of Stirling Corp felt like a cold guillotine blade catching the early light. Emma Evans stood in the center of the lobby, her silhouette sharp against the polished marble. She could hear the frantic click of heels behind her before she saw the reflection in the glass. Victoria Evans was charging toward her, her face a blotchy mask of ruined makeup and desperation, clutching a designer handbag like a weapon. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Victoria hissed, her voice cracking as she reached Emma. She didn't care that the morning receptionists were staring or that a delivery driver had paused to watch the spectacle. "That stunt at the gala, that was a federal crime, Emma. You stole that money. You used a company card you weren't authorized to touch, and I've already told Mom and Dad everything." Emma didn't turn around. She watched her sister's trembling reflection. The sharp, sterile scent of industrial floor wax filled the air, mingling with the heavy, cloying perfume Victoria had sprayed on to hide the smell of the wine she'd clearly spent the night drinking. "I didn't steal anything, Victoria," Emma said, her voice a calm contrast to the jagged edge of her sister's rage. "Liar!" Victoria screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "Security! Why is this woman still in my lobby?" "Get her out!" The two security guards hesitated, looking between the CFO of the company and the woman who stood with the stillness of a mountain. Before they could move, the heavy mahogany doors of the private elevator hissed open. Mr. and Mrs. Evans stepped out, flanked by Marcus and, surprisingly, the maidard from Lusk. "There she is," Victoria shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Emma. "Dad, tell them she's a thief. She humiliated us to cover up her own embezzlement." Mr. Evans looked older than he had 24 hours ago. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes fixed on the black folder Marcus was holding. Mrs. Evans wouldn't even look at Emma. She was too busy clutching her pearls, her face twisted in a sneer of pure social agony. "Victoria, be quiet," Mr. Evans muttered, his voice hollow. "Be quiet. She ruined my life." Victoria doubled down, her entitlement flaring like a dying ember. "She's a secretary. She lives in a studio apartment. She probably sold her soul to get that black card, and I want her arrested before the board meeting starts." "The board meeting has already been moved, Victoria," Marcus said, stepping forward. He didn't look at her with fear anymore. He looked at her with pity. "And the maidard is here to provide the final, verified billing statement from last night. It seems there was a discrepancy in who actually owns the accounts linked to Stirling Corp's operational budget." Emma finally turned. She felt the cold, embossed texture of the acquisition folder in her own hand. "Shall we go upstairs?" "The board is waiting, and I'd hate to keep the new owners waiting." The walk to the boardroom was a funeral procession. Victoria spent the entire elevator ride whispering venom, promising Emma that she would be back in the gutter by noon. But when the doors opened to the top floor, the atmosphere shifted. 5 board members were already seated. Chairman Vance, a man who had known the Evans family for decades, stood at the head of the table. Emma walked to the front of the room. Victoria tried to take her usual seat at the right hand of the chairman, but Vance cleared his throat. That seat is reserved for the representative of Atlantic Global, Victoria. Please sit with your parents. Victoria's face didn't just change, it disintegrated. The manicured mask of the golden child shattered in real time. First, the blood fled her cheeks, leaving behind a sallow, sickly gray that made her expensive foundation look like caked mud. Her eyes, usually sharp with calculated cruelty, went wide and glassy, darting around the room like a trapped animal seeking a hole that didn't exist. Her lower lip began a rhythmic, uncontrollable tremor that she tried to bite back, but her jaw had gone slack, leaving her mouth hanging open in a silent, ugly gasp. Every ounce of that practiced Sterling Corp poise vanished, replaced by a raw, naked terror that made her look smaller, older, and utterly defeated. "Atlantic Global," Victoria whispered, the word coming out as a strangled wheeze. "Emma Evans is the Chief Operating Officer of Atlantic Global," Chairman Vance announced, his voice booming in the sudden silence. "And as of 6 minutes ago, Atlantic Global has completed the hostile takeover of Sterling Corp. They bought out the debt Victoria incurred through her. Creative accounting." Emma spread the documents across the table. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was like a series of small, sharp cracks. She looked at her parents, who were staring at her as if she were a ghost. "You were the COO," Mrs. Evans gasped, her voice trembling. "All this time you let us think. You let us treat you like a servant," Emma finished for her. "I didn't let you do anything. I simply stopped performing the role you assigned me." Emma turned her gaze to Victoria, who was now slumped in a chair, her hands shaking so violently she had to tuck them under her thighs. The maidard stepped forward, placing a single gold-trimmed receipt on the table in front of her. "The bill for the gala, Miss Evans," the maidard said with a slight, mocking bow. "Since your personal cards were declined and the corporate accounts have been frozen due to the fraud investigation, Atlantic Global has settled the debt. However, they have requested a formal lien against your personal assets." "You're taking my house," Victoria choked out. "My car." Emma leaned over the table, her shadow falling over her sister. "I'm taking everything, Victoria. You said I didn't belong in your world. You were right. I own it." Emma stood up and straightened her blazer. She didn't feel the need to shout. The silence in the room was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. She looked at Marcus, who gave her a sharp, professional nod. "Marcus will handle the transition," Emma said, her voice echoing with finality. "Victoria, you have 30 minutes to clear your desk. Security will escort you to the curb. I suggest you keep the shoes. They're the only thing you have left that's actually paid for." Emma walked toward the door. She didn't look back as her mother began to wail or as her father finally put his head in his hands. She stepped out into the hallway, the heavy doors thudding shut behind her, severing her from the wreckage of the family that had never deserved her. As she reached the elevator, her phone chimed. It was a message from the legal team. The police were already waiting in the lobby for Victoria. Emma pressed the button for the ground floor. The descent was smooth, silent, and permanent. 6 months after the heavy glass doors of Sterling Corp had slammed shut for the final time, the view from the 60th floor of the Atlantic Global headquarters still felt like a secret Emma Evans was only just beginning to understand. The city below was a tapestry of moving lights and frantic energy. But up here, behind the triple-paned, soundproofed windows, there was only the low, steady hum of the climate control and the occasional scratch of a fountain pen against heavy bond paper. Marcus stepped into the office, his footsteps muffled by the thick, charcoal-colored carpet that smelled faintly of cedar and expensive stationery. He didn't wait for her to look up from the merger documents. He simply placed a slim, manila envelope on the corner of her mahogany desk. "The final disposition came through this morning," he said, his voice level and professional. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "The court-ordered liquidation of the Sterling assets is complete. After the forensic accountants finished their sweep, there wasn't much left for the creditors, let alone the former CFO. Emma leaned back, the leather of her executive chair creaking softly. She didn't reach for the envelope immediately. Instead, she let her gaze linger on the city skyline. "And Victoria? She's moved into a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs," Marcus replied. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pulled a single photograph from his pocket, one taken by the private security firm Emma kept on retainer. She's working at a boutique insurance firm. Entry level. I believe her title is Junior Claims Processor. It's a far cry from the corner office she thought she'd stolen. Emma finally took the photo. In the grainy image, Victoria looked unrecognizable. The designer silk suits had been replaced by a polyester blend blazer that didn't quite fit her shoulders. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed by the city's most expensive stylists, was pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail. She was standing at a bus stop, clutching a plastic-handled umbrella, her face etched with a weary, hollowed-out expression that Emma had never seen on her sister before. There was no arrogance left in those eyes, only the dull, gray reality of a woman who had finally realized that the world owed her nothing. "The parents?" Emma asked, her voice dropping an octave. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans have settled into the condo in Florida," Marcus said. "The one you purchased through the holding company. They still believe it was a legacy gift from an anonymous benefactor of the Evans family name. They spend most of their time at the community clubhouse, though I'm told they don't talk much about their daughters. It seems the shame of the Sterling scandal was the only thing capable of silencing their boasting." Emma felt a sharp, cold pang in her chest, not of regret, but of a profound, lingering silence. She had won. She had dismantled the fraud, protected the employees Victoria would have left destitute, and ascended to the position she had earned through a decade of silent, grueling labor. She was the COO of one of the most powerful firms on the eastern seaboard, and her name was spoken with a mixture of awe and caution in every boardroom from New York to London. But the cost was written in the empty slots of her digital calendar. There were no more Sunday brunches where she was forced to listen to Victoria's lies. There were no more birthday cards filled with passive-aggressive barbs from her mother. The bridge hadn't just been burned. The very island it led to had been scrubbed from the map. "The maidard from Lusk reached out yesterday," Marcus added, breaking her reverie. "He wanted to personally invite you to the opening of their new rooftop lounge. He mentioned that the VIP table is permanently reserved in your name. He hasn't forgotten the night the truth came out." Emma managed a small, tight smile. "Tell him I appreciate the gesture, but I'll be working late." Marcus nodded, sensing the shift in her mood. "Of course. Will there be anything else, Emma?" "No, Marcus, thank you." When he left, the silence of the 60th floor rushed back in to fill the space. Emma stood and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Far below, the headlights of the evening commute looked like a slow-moving river of gold. She reached into the top drawer of her desk and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket, the only thing she had kept from her childhood home before the movers had cleared it out. Inside was a faded photo of two little girls sitting on a tire swing, their arms linked, their smiles identical. She looked from the locket to the photo of the woman at the bus stop. The sleeping lion had finally finished her hunt, but as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, Emma realized that the view from the top was exactly what she had fought for: breathtaking, absolute, and entirely solitary. She closed the locket with a decisive snap and set it back in the drawer. The past was a debt that had been settled in full. Turning back to her desk, she picked up her pen. There were still 3 more contracts to sign before the city went dark, and for the first time in her life, the only voice she had to listen to was her own.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.